Hey everybody, going to do a golf analysis of Bo Van Pelt, and I think Bo's really good for a model for everybody to kind of follow. There's a lot of good things that this gentleman does in his golf swing, and has a pretty stable, successful career over the last couple of years, and a lot of stuff is very, very orthodox. There's a lot of things I think for amateur players which are really good to look at. So just a couple of things. We're going to look at the forward view, caddy view of Bo, and the camera angle here, just about the best I could find. Terry up at the San Francisco Golf Academy does a really good job with getting film from a lot of tour events. So we got to give him a hand for doing this for all the instructors and all over the world, actually, because they get a pretty good bird's eye view of what people are doing at a high level. So and for me, I kind of come from a school of thought that a lot of the best players in the world do a lot of things that a lot of the average players just can't do. Number one is they don't have the time, and number two, they don't have the preordained movement patterns and things of that nature that they've developed over the long haul, even from a junior career. So sometimes we look at them and we go, wow, that's pretty impressive what they do, but for an average player, how can I do that without quitting my job and going to the gym and hitting balls for 4 hours a day? It's just probably not going to be happening. So in any event, let's just kind of get into what Bo does, and we'll look at some of the things just from each position. From the address position, his camera's a little bit back from his center, a little bit behind him, to Bo's right. Pretty standard grip. You're going to see a lot of different variation on the PGA Tour with players with different grips, and they all do it for numerous reasons. There's no real standardization about that. The same thing with alignment, posture, all that kind of good stuff. But he's pretty much pretty centered. Not much tilt to the right. That's something that's good to kind of look at. Now, one of the interesting things, if we look at this, is I have a yellow dot at his sternum, another yellow dot with a red line going down to his pelvis. So when you look at that, we can say that's somewhat vertical. We don't know that looking at 2D video. We can kind of see the degrees that he has at his address, maybe on 3D, but overall pretty centered. Now, the thing that Bo does a little bit of a shift to the right initially, and what he's actually doing is, this is where you might say that a tour player might look like he has good rhythm, and Bo has this very rhythmic motion. He doesn't have a real fast, slashy motion. And so you see a lot of guys like this, he kind of has a little bit of a Colin Montgomery move. So when he goes back, halfway back, when his left arm's parallel to the ground, you're going to see some pretty good stuff. You're going to see his head doesn't move too much. Maybe it goes down about 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and to the right 2.5 inches. But as he gets from about halfway back, you'll see he's actually starting to extend back to where he was at address, okay, where his head. So you can actually see the part of his crown of his head, actually from here to the top, is actually moving back forward and up. Okay, now the question is, why does he do that? Well, a lot of good players on the PGA Tour get their arms, up. And how does a player get his arms up in the backswing? Well, what he's done as he's moved from this position here to the top of his backswing, he actually started standing up. Okay, now he didn't literally stand up, but one of the terms we could use for this is that he's used some extension for leverage. So he started actually standing up. So he's had a little bit of without getting too complicated, he's had some rotation, he's had some leftward tilt, and he's had some extension to get him into this portion. So if you look at that one more time, you'll see that he has some rotation, a little shift to the right, a little bit of rotation, and then as he gets halfway back, he's pretty much done with his turn, his arms are going to load, he's going to extend, and that's what gets his left arm up. Now he didn't lift his arms to do that, he extended to get his arms up. Okay. Now what's really interesting about this top end of his backstroke, you're also going to see that his left knee has moved in and down to the center of his ankle. So I'm going to put a little line right here. This is where this started, where the yellow dot is, and it's moved right just about over the ankle, maybe a few degrees in from there. Okay. Now for an amateur player, from everything that I've described to this point, what is something to take away? Well, if you tend to feel that you're a rhythmical type player and not a Nick Price or a Ben Hogan type player, you know, you're going to feel that a little Colin Montgomery move might be okay, because, you know, we're not going to try to slide our head to the right, because that would be pretty inefficient and maybe ineffective for most players. I'm not saying all players, but probably for most. And a little bit of extension if you have problems getting your left arm high enough in the backswing. Having some extension in your backswing is a great way to develop some ballistic speed. Okay, so that's what I would take away from this point here. Now, we're going to look up from the rear view, and we're going to look at what he does. So I have some lines here. I have a yellow line from his club going from the base of the hosel up through the butt end of the club, and another line coming from just inside the sweet spot up through the right elbow. And you can see at address, you know, he has a little bit of knee flex, has his chin down. You're going to see that his chin is not up. Okay, that's one thing if you're an amateur player. I do not recommend having your chin up, because your eyes are going to be focused out past the basket, and it's tough for your shoulders to work properly. Okay, so as Bo goes back, you can see he takes it back on the arc, and his face is a little bit shut. So right here, now it's just a little bit closed here to the circle that he's swinging on. Okay, and it's just, I'm not saying that is a circle, it's just somewhere around that would be considered an arc. And as he goes back halfway back, you can see that he's hitting a mid iron here, probably a 7 or 8 iron. So this butt end of the club at this point has moved, if we were to measure this from here's his shoulders, you know, it's moved inward and back on the circle, you know, 37 to 35 degrees, somewhere in there. Okay, so there's an inward property to his hands. Now, if you're an amateur player, this is a real important thing to do, because it gives you ability to get your shoulders to turn and gives you some inward property to hit the ball farther. Okay, so the first two things for the amateur player were the backswing was key 1, key 2 was the left arm was going in on an arc, you know, about 35, 37 degrees. Now, if you have a 7 iron, you wouldn't take this in 60 degrees, just as much as you wouldn't take it in 5 degrees. So there's a little matter of for you guys, there's a little matter of looking maybe in a mirror or on a videotape and seeing if at this point you actually are in that much. Now as you do this, you're going to notice that from address, I'm going to put a little line right on his base of his neck, and when he goes back, his shoulders, as he does this, are actually, you know, they look tilted. Now they don't go straight down, but they tilted enough that he was able to keep his head somewhat within some center. So you can see that, you know, obviously he's extended a little bit to keep his head centered, like it did on the left pitcher. But his shoulders never turned flat. Okay? That's for certain. So this is on a tilted angle. You're swinging a golf club on a tilted angle because the ball's on the ground. It's not out here. So the shoulders are going to turn to some degree, maybe 90 degrees around that spine. Okay? They're going to turn, tilt, and extend. Now, remember the loading pattern when he starts to extend from the left arm being parallel to the ground, and we'll bring these both to the same location. Okay? Now, you can see his arms aren't perfectly straight. Okay, left arm straighter than the right, but his right elbow, I want you to look at his right elbow as he does this. He starts to extend, and his right arm starts to load. and you can see his head's not really going up or down, it's just going maybe a few degrees up and forward as he goes to the top of his backswing, which is right about there. Now here's a neat point, okay? A lot of people have this issue, especially when you're a higher handicap, is they look at this and they go, man, you know, that looks laid off to me. And what they're actually looking at is they're looking at the club that's pointed over this way, okay? Now that's not laid off, that's actually, you know, like you can call it on plane. I don't like using that term because it doesn't really exist. But the club is actually in line to that arc that he took it back on, and the arms have shifted up because the right elbow has bent, okay? And this is a good point. When you look at this, you're going to have the feeling, or the illusion, I'll call it the illusion, that the right elbow, you know, and in Bo's case, is parallel, if not underneath, his left elbow. And that's a good way to feel like you're loading the shaft, okay? And that's a pretty important piece for an amateur player. So this would be probably piece 3. Because a lot of players, if I was to throw an amateur player up, I'd say about above 50 to 60% of the players have a cross the line look, and their wrist angles start getting affected by this. Okay. Now in Bo's case, you can see that you have a little bit of change in the knee flex. So the right knee is a little bit higher than the left. That shows you that in order for him to make a backswing, his hips have turned. His right hip is higher than his left. It's also allowed his thorax and his upper center to turn. And so there's some change in flexion. Now, a friend of mine did a wonderful video a few years back explaining this, David Orr, back in the Carolinas, and he explained this, and I like the analogy, and I use it a lot, and hopefully he doesn't mind me saying this, but he used the analogy of a double helix, okay? So from the ground, the ankles have turned less than the knees have turned less than the hips, and the hips have turned less than the shoulders. So it's kind of like a DNA strand when you look at the golf swing. But it doesn't mean that he's trying to restrict his hip turn, because his knees are connected to his ankles and your ankles are connected to the ground. There's going to be change of flexion of the knees and change of rotation in the knees and hips. So without really getting too complicated with this, this is just something you're going to see with a lot of good players that play at a high level. Okay. Now, so this, we just basically described his backswing. I'm not going to get too much into his face angles and stuff like that, because you know, this face is a little closed just like it was going back. And then as we make this transitional move into the downswing, you see he gets a little bit of a lift. And this is kind of indicative of, this is something that's very indicative of some players. You know, you'd look at like a Dustin Johnson or something like that. When the face is closed and they start coming back down, we go about left arm parallel to the ground, you can see the shaft's just staying above the elbow plane, hypothetical elbow plane for that matter. Okay? So I'm going to bring him back down to there. Now, another thing you're going to notice is that he's actually transferred, if we look at the left picture, he's transferred his weight more forward, and his left knee has moved past where it was at address. And as he's doing this, you can see that his left shoulder has stayed lower than his right, so his head won't go backwards. Okay, so you can see that this is on both pictures. Now, as he does this, without getting into too much here, he's moving forward, moving forward, moving forward, and that club stays a little high. Okay, and he has to do that because the face is closed. Okay, so if he got this shaft more like Rory McIlroy, where it's a little more from the inside, or if he tilted back, this ball would have a problem starting left and going maybe further left. Okay, because the face would be close to his target, and his path would be going right. And so if you had that maybe on TrackMan, if this was his target, let's look at this one picture out here on the right. Okay, so here's his target out here. So if he came in with a face that was closed, that means he would be aiming at the point of impact, at least at the interval of impact, somewhere within this range. Okay, so the ball would start in this area where that red dot is, or red box. And then if his path is going further to the right because he tilted back or he was shallower, like Roy McIlroy or guys that draw the ball, maybe a Robert Allenby, this ball would curve further to the left and would be subject to this bunker on the left. So he's designed really a way to play around with this. Now, for a low handicapper, you know, you can get away with this. For a high handicapper, I wouldn't recommend it because you don't have the speed to do this procedure. So guys that have a lot of speed, I see more of this than guys that don't have enough speed. So it comes into the impact interval, which is right about there. Okay, a couple things here. If this would be point number 4, excuse me. And if you're a high handicap player, you're going to notice that his handle is forward at impact. Okay, I know his face is square to close there because he tends to hit an overdraw when he draws it, and he tends to hit a slight fade with his irons. So when he draws it, it's not a push draw, it's an overdraw. So for you guys that are watching this that are a higher handicap, this is probably a good place to kind of start hitting balls from. I call this like an impact fixed drill. So you can notice that his right shoulder is lower than his left, his right arm is under his left, his weight's forward, and this right heel is banking. So he's not spinning or turning his hips. So what he's actually doing here, and people coin the phrase that he's turning his hips, or players turn their hips. And there is some rotation in the hip girdle, but we need to explain what he's actually doing as he's extending his hips when he's doing this. So his hips are going to start appearing like they go from here, okay, and for the teachers, you know, they'd understand this. This would be considered back into a flexion state. So he's back in his first address tilt, and then at the impact tilt, he starts extending as he's hitting it. And then you can see his arms kind of go down the line a little bit here. But he's extending as he goes into the follow through. Okay? As we look at the left-hand picture, you can see that he's hit, and you're not going to see that face turn over too much. It's going to stay pretty square for longer. As he gets to here, now his knee works together because he's extending his hips as he comes through. Okay? So just about every good player does that at the high level, especially the guys that can hit it out of their shadow. Now, here's a good checkpoint for the amateur player. Real important. So I'm going to eliminate some of these lines over here, and I'm going to zip this in just to 1. Okay, and I'm going to put a line right on the left heel. So if you guys take anything out of today, remember there's 4 things so far covered, and this would be the last one covered. So we can see that if we put a line right off the left heel, he's moved his weight slightly forward. This left knee has actually gone to probably about his toe. Okay, and remember, he's not hitting a big sling draw here. He might be hitting either an overdraw or a slight fade or a straight shot. So if he went further forward, he'd have problems because of his face angles. But as he hits this golf ball, you're going to notice a couple things. He hits with the handle forward, right? And watch the difference from here, the handle height. Okay, this is just for point of measure, and as he comes in, his handle now is right here, so it's already risen at impact. And as he's come through to the club's parallel to the ground, his club has gotten higher off the ground. Okay, so if I went from like a 9 o'clock position, which has been around for a long time, a lot of different teachers use this, and I like the idea and the premise of it. But if you go from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock on a clock, you're going to notice that the club's actually risen off the ground. Okay, and what this does, it slows the rate of closure of the club face. Okay, now sure, the club's rolling over at some point, just hopefully not too soon. But as it comes to here, you can see that the handle also has moved away from his belt. Okay, and his handle has risen. So that shows you that the hips from this position here have extended to raise that handle up as he gets to his follow through. Look how much higher his belt gets into his finish. Okay, so that's just something to take note of, and that would be the fifth thing. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. If you guys have any questions about this, feel free to post on the YouTube link. And these are some of the things I like about Bo's motion and his golf swing. So it's very, very orthodox in many ways. There's a lot of things that you can take from it. He might describe some of these things completely differently, but as far as the 2D version, this is pretty much my interpretation of what he does. Okay, so everybody have a good evening, and hope you enjoyed the video. Take care.